Beep, beep. Hello. Peeps. Sun shining. Okay. This is liable to be a long one. So, a couple of things before we start. If you haven't got time, listen to it later. All right? I urge you to listen to the end on this one because I think this is a really important confluence of events in the fight against the TQ plus nuttery. So I think it's important that as many people hear the full story about this as possible. So if you can put the time aside to listen to it, even if it's a long one, I'd be really grateful. Secondly, if you can subscribe, that'd be really good. But more importantly, can you please click the share button and share this on social media? Something's happened here that I think is important, and it's at the upper levels of the problem, i.e. it's linchpin stuff that can have a real influence on how we move forward. So if you could do that, I'd be grateful. Thirdly, if you can buy me a coffee, that'd be great. Just help me out to keep going. And I'm reaching out to the Canadians to try and find some Canadian warrior teachers. I'm going to start advertising that over the next few days. So if you know anybody who's Canadian, let me know who wants to be a warrior teacher. If not, if you see the advert floating about on Twitter, if you could retweet it, I'd be really grateful. I need to get the numbers up so I can run it. It's 1 a.m. UK time. I must be mad. So I'll be up at 1 a.m. in the morning till 3 teaching people. Isn't it fab? International working. I am an international person. So, this is all good news. I'm really pleased to do it. But if you can help me get the Canadian one going, that would be fantastic. That would be fantastic. Because I've already got a couple of people who are really excited, but we need, a couple more to make it worthwhile for all of us. Okay, so today I want to talk to you about something that's happened over the past week or two. And it involves somebody who's a UN expert, apparently, on sexual orientation and gender identity, or SOGI, as it's known, SOGI, called Victor. Now, Victor came over, and he has, to say the least, been a major player in the application and the placing of the template of gender identity ideology and hard left thinking over just about every country that's involved in this bollocks now, quite frankly. So he is the UN expert, so to speak, right? So when he came over, he met with a number of alumni and the cognoscenti of the GI world, So he was there, obviously he met with stakeholders, that term, I hate that term, right? But he also met with Bev and Dennis, right? And other folk who went to see him. And I asked Dennis afterwards, how did it go? And he said, well, he knows now what he thought he did, what he said he didn't know before. So he didn't know all the problems they were having with the homophobia of his movement. He didn't know of the misogyny of his movement. He didn't know of the activities of AGP men. I don't believe it. He's a liar. There we go. That's what I think is. He's a liar through and through, right? But then he has to be. He believes in gender identity. See? You lie about the small things and the big things. You're going to do both, aren't you? Small and big. Oh, I didn't know that. Yes, you did. Liar. So, the United Nations has now issued a statement. It's quite frankly unbelievable. And the statement says, UK, keep calm and respect diversity. Says UN expert. I am deeply concerned, he says, about increased bias-motivated incidents of harassments, threats and violence against LGBT people, including a rampant surge in hate crimes in the UK. You may be deeply concerned, Victor, but you're only deeply concerned for your own virtue. You nasty little man. Victor Madrigal Borloz. He can't help himself, so immediately they force-team the LGB with the T. Stop doing it. We're nothing to do with them. No gay man or lesbian worth their salt wants anything to do with the alphabet people. More and more are saying, no, we're nothing to do with you, right? We're nothing to do with them. So he has to force team, because if he doesn't force team, the T-bit falls apart. There is not a surge of harassments, threats and violence against LGBT people, and certainly not a rampant surge in hate crimes in the UK, not least of all because there's no such thing as a hate crime. There has to be a crime with a hate modifier, but there's no such thing as a hate crime. The man's a liar. All of this, he said, is attributed by a wide range of stakeholders to the toxic nature of the public debate surrounding sexual orientation and gender identity. Well, first off, there is no public debate that I'm aware of about sexual orientation. Nobody gives a toss. We've been doing it. We did this. Victor, we did this. Over 100 years we did this, Victor. Sexual orientation isn't the problem. Gender identity is the problem. But you can't separate the two, can you? Because if you separate the two, your house of cards directly from the United Nations Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner, falls to pieces when gender identity has to stand on its own. He also noted significant work in the country through strategies, plans of action and public policies, which are in a vibrant development in all 4 nations of the UK. He was also encouraged by the actions of national governments and civil services in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland in relation to devolved competencies in health, education, housing and employment. Now he's picked out those 3, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, because they've gone bonkers, haven't they? All 3 of them. He hasn't mentioned England. England has to hold the fort on this. We really have to get tough on this if we are going to prevent this from swamping not just England, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland, but the damned globe. We're going to have to put the brakes on this, and we're going to have to put the brakes on hard. We're going to have to repeal the GRA. We're going to have to edit the Equality Act. And just out of interest, I also think we need to do away with affirmative action, because that would help tremendously if we did away with affirmative action. A number of states in America are doing it. But we need to hold the line on this very strongly. The expert expressed grave concern about delays in long-promised legislation to ban practices of conversion of sexual orientation and gender identity. Liar. Right? Gender identity is conversion therapy. Gender identity ideology is gay and lesbian conversion therapy. They are converting medically, socially, psychologically, manipulating young people in order to trans away the gay. Victor, you liar. He's then put, the vicissitudes of this and other necessary public policies appear to be connected to political discourse concerning gender diverse persons. What does that even mean? Gender diverse persons and refugees and asylum seekers. So now he's force-teaming gender identity with refugees and asylum seekers. He's force-teaming them with gender identity in a kind of sleight of hand, because he knows if GI has to stand on its own, it falls. This is the UN representative. He then criticised the UK for the illegal migration bill and blanket policy decisions in relation to trans persons deprived of liberty. What he means by that is he wants men in women's prisons. The guy's a fully paid up member of this cult. A fully paid up member of this cult. He also took issue with the recent advice by the UK Equalities and Human Rights Commission. How dare he, you cheeky little man, how dare you, who have just been recertified as top class, first class in their work in human rights. You nasty, gender-addled grievance jurgle from abroad. He said that the UK Equalities and Human Rights Commission promoted the reduction in human rights protections for trans persons with legal recognition of their gender, i.e. men who think they're women and women who think they're men, right? These actions were admittedly with the objective of withdrawing trans women from legal protections to which they are entitled under the Equality Act. The expert urged all stakeholders to recognise that democracies benefit from healthy debate in an environment that includes protection of free speech and accountability for hate speech. No, Victor. When is the government, or a government? I think it'll be about 7 years, because we're going to get Labour in and they're going to wreck this country and people are really going to realise how bad this is. Maybe we need that. Maybe we need, these nutters to get in so we can see the full force and the danger it is to children, women and gay and lesbians. Maybe that's what we need. But what we really need, what we honestly need, is a government who is prepared to repeal all hate speech laws, to enshrine in law censorship not happening unless it breaks the law directly, to control social media in the same way by saying, if a post doesn't break the law, you don't get to take it down, and if you do, we're going to fine the ass off you. We need to get rid of hate speech laws. We need to get rid of the Gender Recognition Act. We need to remove gender recognition from the Equality Act. Victor, it is fairly obvious from what you are saying here that you think men should be in women's spaces. sexual orientation doesn't exist, and that we should be transing the gay away in children. You vile little goblin. That's what he's saying. He then has the absolute nerve to say the following. Just incredible. Politicians must carry out evidence-based evaluations, free from stigma and preconception. There is absolutely no evidence that gender identity exists. There is absolutely no evidence that it is anything other than a very rare kind of distress in some people, or B, a socially transmitted disease of the mind, which is an educational problem and not a mental health one. The expert will present a full report on his visit to the Human Rights Council by June 2024 at the latest. I suggest we leave it. Tell them to go fuck themselves. Just get out of it all. Drop it all, right? All this nonsense agendas. Sod off. We're going to do reality in this country. We always bloody have. That is from the United Nations Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner. Inculcating the insanity and the madness of gender identity, ideology and queer theory at the very heart of their work on human rights. Force teaming a deeply theological and political violent, because it will get violent, folks, trust me, hard left ideology as a human right. Get your Oreos around that one, eh? Or your peepers. Right, so far so bad. So far so bad. He's not listened to a damn word that's got, that has done anything to influence his utter madness, his utter insanity, at the very heart of his forced teaming of LGB with the T, and his need to push gender identity ideology and an extreme form of hard left politics at the heart of human rights. So I was very pleased to see, and this is the second part of this, if you will, in The Critic on the morning of the 12th of May, that Bev Jackson, erstwhile stalwart of LGBAlliance, all links as usual will be in the Dubras, has written an article for Artillery Row in The Critic magazine. The title begins, "Who took the SO out of SOGI?" SOGI being sexual orientation, gender identity. So what Bev asks here to begin with is who took the sexual orientation out? And then the subheadline is, I love it, the UN bumbles on gender identity. Bumbles, Bev, I think bumbles is a very Bev word. What do you think? I think it's a very Bev word. Bev Jackson, author, says, "Who is responsible for undermining the rights of lesbians and gays at United Nations? Why, that would be Victor Madrigal-Borlos, the UN's independent expert for sexual orientation and gender identity. Brackets, SOGI, close brackets. What's that, you say? Shouldn't he be protecting the rights of people who are attracted to others of the same sex? But SOGI is a way of getting round that. Having an advocate for sexual orientation and gender identity is a bit like having one for veganism and chicken farming. It doesn't work." Oh, wonderful. Veganism and chicken farming. Victor has just concluded an official visit to the UK, probably his last, since his second term is coming to the end. For the first 9 days of his 10-day visits, he met almost exclusively with gender identity enthusiasts. I said it before and I'll say it again, it's a top-down imposition, it's not a grassroots movement. This isn't about human rights, it's about them forcing upon us a worldview that will enable them to do what they want to do. It's a men's rights movement. So, just to reiterate, for the first 9 days of his 10-day visit, he met almost exclusively with gender identity enthusiasts. It was not, I think, a question of saving the best, in his view, for last. Victor is a passionate advocate of gender self-ID. Nutter, see? He has an impressive ability to claim over and over again with a straight face things that are untrue. That's a nice way of saying he's a liar, Bev. I think he's a liar. He seems to have gotten on well with Nicola Sturgeon. Well, colour me surprised. Let all the wickedness and bile in the swamp come to the surface. He came to her aid twice to promote Scotland's ill-fated gender recognition reform bill, One of Victor's favourite untruths is that international human rights law requires the introduction of gender self-ID. This completely false notion relies on a little-known document called the Yogyakarta Principles, or YP, which identifies as best practice when it is simply an activist's manifesto. Human rights law professor Rob Wintermute, one of the signatories back in 2006 to this foundational document that has caused us so much trouble, later changed his position when he realised that the impact on women's rights had not been considered when the Yogyakarta Principles were being drafted. What a surprise. Men doing manly things. Where Victor is supposed to represent SOGI, sexual orientation, gender identity, he focuses on the GI without the SO. Victor is the only independent expert to have a dual mandate encompassing irreconcilable aims. Bev writes beautifully here. It recently emerged that he receives funding from the Arcus Foundation. Here we go, folks. Which means that rather than an independent expert, he is a paid mouthpiece for gender identity. If you want to see more about the Arcus Foundation and how this is funded, I will put a link downstairs to the blog of a marvellous person called Tish. One of the best researchers in the business, so I'll put a link to that as well. Victor maintains there is no conflict between the rights of LGB people and those claimed under the banner of trans rights. Really, Victor? Really? You think there's no conflict with a group of people who are more acutely aware of what their body is and what they are, and with a bunch of people who want to escape the reality of the world? You don't think that there's... Right, okay. Victor. He maintains there's no conflict. Whatever definition of trans you choose, and there are as many as there are scandals in the SNP, this is obviously untrue. Either people born male belong on a lesbian dating site, or they don't. Either persons born female can be in a gay men's sauna without revealing their little secret, which is what they do. It's sex by deception, right? Or they don't belong there. Either it is fine to say you're only attracted to people of the same sex, or it isn't, because saying so out loud is hurtful and makes you a transphobe or a sexual racist, as Nancy Kelly, somehow still CEO of Stonewall, has been known to say. In this conflict you can jump one way or the other, but you can't say no jumping is required. Beautifully written. Victor also insists, and this is his favourite mantra, that self-ID has not caused any problems in any country in the world. He has been sent pages of evidence to the contrary. Abuses in prisons, in countries from Ireland to Canada. Explanations that data is becoming impossible to collect. Abuses in women and girls' sport. The self-exclusion of women of faith from vital services. Above all, there is documentations of what happens when children are sold a lie. It really isn't possible to change sex. It is difficult to hear the pain expressed by dozens of women and some men, now in their 20s or 30s, who dare to speak in public about their bitter regret that they believed the lie, acted on it, and are forced to live the rest of their lives with the consequences. Sex is sex, and gender is... Who knows, says Beb. Victor knows, apparently, and he also has a bridge to sell. My goodness, Bev, you can write, right? Bev continues. LGBAlliance and other LGB groups have sent him numerous submissions, but he buries them and dismisses criticism of self-ID as bigoted and exclusionary narratives. Nasty bigots. It is, of course, exclusionary to exclude males from lesbian spaces. Everyone who stands up for sex-based rights is so used to being called names that the abuse just inspires confidence. No one who has real arguments resorts to name-calling. At LGBAlliance, we became so concerned by Victor's non-fulfillment of his sexual orientation mandate, his misrepresentations and his dismissal of our concerns, that in January this year we submitted a long and detailed complaint in several languages to the President of the Human Rights Council and published it on their website. The link to that is in the article. This visit to the UK, Victor's swan song is his ill-fated position. In his ill-fated position was a last chance to repeat the many points we have made to him over the years. We are pleased he met with Joanna Cherry. Hello, Joanna. Joanna Cherry, chair of the Human Rights Committee, who was doubtless able to correct his misunderstanding of international human rights law. His final day's schedule included, wonder of wonders, anything to do with the complaint, a meeting with some of those he has spent his entire term of office ignoring or belittling. Kate Harris, Dennis Kavanagh, Paula Bolton. Oh, I got it wrong. It wasn't Bev that was there. It was Kate. Sorry, Kate. Oh, I got it wrong. Sorry, Bev and Kate. It was Kate that was there. Kate Harris of LGBAlliance, Dennis Kavanagh of the Gay Men's Network, and Paula Bolton of Lesbian Labour. The LGB group's aim was to ask them very pointed questions to elicit brief, cohesive replies, not the kind of butlerish gibberish he is used to spouting. Of course, the challenging of the binary causes significant sensations of vertigo, when the challenging of the binary appears to seek dismantling of binary structures. We wanted him to say yes or no to whether homosexuals should have rights. Simple stuff like that. At this stage, there was, and I agree, there is very little point in being conciliatory. Years of polite requests to produce no results, so he bluntly repeated all the things we've been telling him for years. Funnily enough, he professed ignorance of all of it. The cotton ceiling, the difficulty trans-identified males experience getting into lesbians' pants. Right? Never heard of it. Homosexual detransitioners. Surely part of his mandate in the interest of inclusion. Please send details of such persons. Didn't know about it. Liar. Kira Bell, Sonia Appleby. Never heard of them? Quote from Dr. Hilary Cass on lesbians who had felt pressure to transition. Silence. Had he met with Dr. Cass? Didn't want to say. Gids clinic due to close because an NHS review found it to be unsafe? Oh, hadn't heard. David Bell. Who's that? Homophobia, a key factor driving teens to seek gender transition. Here Victor raised a hand and flatly ruled it out. That is not possible, he said. He believes it to his very roots. The gendered soul, the religiosity of this bonkers cult belief system. And he believes it to his very soul, and he's in the UN as the independent expert on sexual orientation, gender identity, and human rights. Her dating site controversy, which was a website for women that kept solely for women. The Hoyle case in Tasmania, in which a lesbian gathering was ruled unlawful. No, didn't know about that. This last one is a bit telling, since it is actually mentioned in one of Victor's own reports. So he's lying about his own report. He's a liar. They're all liars. They start with the original lie. Then they have to lie to cover it up. It's like Game of Thrones, isn't it, with all this lying going on? What Victor doesn't know, or doesn't want to know, or refuses to acknowledge, is that you can't promote gender self-ID without undermining the interests of people with same-sex orientation. Self-ID zealots, such as Victor, they didn't write that, I just said that. Self-ID zealots say two men or both identify as women can be a lesbian couple. Their opponents, including LGBAlliance, Lesbian Labour and Gay Men's Network, say that is homophobic nonsense. Victor's position is being advertised. Can it be filled by someone who sees the contradictions and dares to conduct open discussion about them? Would the UN accept such an individual? We shall see. Well, thank you, Bev, for a well-written and thoughtful piece. I've said it before, so I'll say it again. There are no both sides to this. Every organisation that's involved in this, who understands the iatrogenic nature of gender identity ideology and queer theory, has to state unequivocally, gender identity does not exist. We repeal the GRA. There are only people in distress, and we need to criminalise the teaching of or practicing of gender identity ideology, queer theory or critical race theory in schools. I think that's the only way forward now. We need a government with some strength. We need somebody to lead. Give me a leader. Don't care which side. Give me a leader who will stand up and say unequivocally, this cult will be eradicated from the social and cultural and political spheres of the UK, and it will be done by telling the absolute truth about the damage that is being done to children, the damage that is being done to gay people and women, and the damage that is being done to our society by a bunch of power and oppression nitwits who are so far left or so far liberal that they think the individual, insane though they are and mentally ill though they are, trumps the rights of the rest of us. I ask you, please, to share this so that people can see what's going on here on a larger stage than the one we are used to engaging with. So people can see this isn't just about what's happening in your local school, it's actually about the type of world you want to live in, and the likes of the United Nations and UNESCO and the WHO, and whoever it may be, have been contaminated by gender-addled grievance gerbils like Victor. And it's time they ended this. Go well, people.